The following story is presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this entertaining tale. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Every bit helps this channel grow.
The Walking Dead by Terry Hendryx from Adventures into Darkness number 10, June 1953. Sandra was sure she wanted to see a Brazilian zombie until it was a hot day in Santarém, Brazil, and I looked at the sky and thought it might rain. We needed a good rain to lay the heat. It was too hot even for a comfortable siesta, but I had nothing much to do except sleep for the next few days, having just returned from checking the rubber gather at points further down the Amazon. Maybe I'd just drink enough gin slings to drown out the heat, I thought, and it was then I saw Sandra Mave, or, rather, it was her little silver-winged seaplane that I saw coming in from the direction of Fordlandia. The plane came into the basin there on a perfect 3 points and taxied straight over to my river cruiser. Sandra climbed out and tossed me a line. Brunette and bronzed from the sun, she was a picture in her white pith helmet, white shorts and halter. "How's the life of the idle rich on the Tapajos?" I greeted, referring to the big rubber plantation her old man managed there. "Dull," she said. "I thought maybe you'd like to take a swing over toward the upper Maikuru with me." "Hey, that's zombie land," I said. "Tal wouldn't be caught dead even on this end of the river." Tal, short for Talau, was the native mechanic who always flew with her, more to get her safely out of the jungle if she was ever forced down than for any extraordinary talent with a plane, I suspected. "I know," she replied, "but Tal isn't with me this trip, being flat on his back with the fever, which is why I decided this was my chance to see a zombie close up at last." "That's a dangerous trip." "Why, Johnny?" she said. "I didn't know you really believed in zombies." I shook my head. "Aside from the zombies, you've got a gas problem going all the way in there and back, and if you should have to set down somewhere in that jungle, the trip out would be rough." I dropped my gaze to her long, well-tanned legs, especially in those shorts. "Ha," she said. "Those are just to impress you. I've got some perfectly good jungle garb aboard. And as for the gas, the 2 new auxiliary wing tanks you see there should solve the problem nicely. You know what I think? I think you're afraid we might really run across some zombies back there." I snorted. Nobody can call Johnny Gannon chicken and make it stick. Pushing the plane clear of my cruiser, I jumped aboard. For a supposedly intelligent doll, you are sometimes only scenic, which is how after gassing up fresh a half hour later, I happened to be flying over the jungle with a beautiful girl in search of the zombies of native legend which were supposed to be somewhere on the upper Maikuru River. As we picked up the river below us and Ab began to follow it up toward its head waters, we ran into a rain squall that shook the little plane from prop to rudder. She should have turned back right then, but since she'd hinted, I was afraid once already today, I wasn't the guy to suggest it. She knew it too, but she was stubborn. "We're so close now, I hate to turn back, after coming all this distance. Maybe we'll run out of this storm," she said hopefully. But we didn't. We climbed 10,000 feet, and still we didn't get above it. This was a deep one, brought on no doubt by all the hot weather we'd had lately. And what had started as a simple rain squall was now a full-fledged storm, a really bad one, and fast getting worse. She swung about then, but it was too late. The main body of the storm had boiled in behind us, and it was about twice as rough as the way we'd been headed. It was getting blacker by the minute. Lightning ripped and thunder crashed about us, and the wind continued to rise. Sandra brought the plane about once more and nosed it down sharply. "I'm going to set down on the river," she cried. "Even with those whitecaps, it's kicking up. That's our best bet." I'll say this for the girl, she could really handle the stick. She made a sweet landing on some pretty choppy water, then taxied over to the doubtful lee of a heavily wooded point that stuck out from one bank of the river. Nosing right in against the bank, she cut the motor, scrambled out of the cabin, and grabbed the forward line. "Toss out the tail anchor," she shouted, and then she leaped over onto the bank to secure the plane by its foreline to a tree. It was almost dark as night now, and I was busy with the anchor for a minute or two, making sure it was well hooked on the river bottom and pulling the line snug so the tail of the plane didn't whip around in the wind and smash itself to bits on the shore. From the way the plane held fast to the jungle edge, I guessed Sandra hadn't had too much trouble finding a tree or log to tie to, though all I could see in the rain and darkness was the white blob of her cloth ing. Then lightning flashed, and I saw her plainly, and I saw something else that sent cold shivers down my spine. Standing behind her, reaching out one great arm for her, was a man who must have stood a good 7 feet tall. But more than the size of him, it was his face that shocked me to the core. He had the features of the native Indians, except for the skin, which was a deathly gray color and sunken in at the eye sockets and below his cheekbones like a death's head. It couldn't be, I told myself. Zombies were just something out of ghost stories and the imaginations of superstitious natives. But even as I saw those withered eye sockets, I knew I was wrong. Here was one in the flesh, and a more fearsome sight I've never seen. I heard Sandra give a blood-chilling scream then, and I started toward her as fast I could scramble across the plain. Another flash of lightning showed her being lifted like a tiny doll in one of the zombies' arms, fighting and twisting futilely as she gave vent to one scream after another. With no thought of anything but to free her from the clutches of this monster, I came in on the other side of him and slugged him with everything I had in a looping right hand. It was about as effective as trying to knock down an elephant with your fist. He just lashed out with his unburdened arm and sent me spinning back into the river like a 10-pin. I thought of piranhas, the South American fish that in some rivers will eat a man to the bone in a few seconds' time, and of crocodiles, but there must have been neither around at the moment. Then I remembered the 30-30 rifle that Sandra kept in the plane for shooting crocodiles that sometimes threatened to make a meal of a pontoon, and I climbed up fast and got the rifle. There were a few shells in the gun's magazine, but I could find no extra ammunition and couldn't waste time rummaging for it now. I was afraid I might lose all trace of them in the jungle. But after the first fringe of dense undergrowth along the river, there was a relatively open park-like area, and I had no trouble in spotting the giant zombie moving away in long, stiff-legged strides. I caught up to them easily, or to within 20 feet of them, and shouted in both Indian and Portuguese at the zombie, telling him to stop and drop the girl, or I would shoot. He heard the shouting, all right, but I don't think he understood it. He paused confusedly, then dropped the now inert Sandra to the ground. I wondered if he'd squeezed the life from her, or broken her neck, or whether she had just fainted. There was no time to ponder on this, though, for the giant immediately swung about and came toward me. I fired once to try to scare him off, but he kept coming, so I aimed for his shoulder. I'm a good shot, if I do say so, and I knew I hit him, yet he kept coming without even a break in his stride. I shot for the chest and then the stomach, but still the zombie came on. I realized then that I couldn't kill this thing, since he was already dead. My only hope was to incapacitate him. He was very close now, lumbering toward me, and I started backing up as I shot at his legs. It was on the last shot that I broke one of his legs, and he was no more than 5 feet from me when he fell. I knew it was the last shell in the gun, because for an instant I didn't think he would go down, and pulled the trigger again, only to hear it click on emptiness. As I ran over to pick up Sandra, I saw other zombies emerging from a copse of trees not 20 yards away. All were huge and gray-skinned, and I remembered the Indian legend now that told how only the most massive of warriors was chosen for this life-after-death existence. I picked Sandra up and made for the plain, casting hurried glances over my shoulder to see the whole clan in hot pursuit. I slapped her face as I ran, for only she knew how to handle the plane. She started to come to, and I tossed her in the river, cast off the shoreline, lifted her sputtering out of the water into the plane, and pulled up the tail anchor. She got the plane going, and we got out of there and got safely home despite the storm. Sandra's hair turned white overnight, and she's my wife now, and we never go near the Maikuru River.